Welcome to Exchange Exposed, a quarterly podcast covering on-premises Exchange, Exchange Online, and related technologies. Exchange Exposed is hosted by Exchange MVPs Tony Redmond and Paul Robichaux. This episode is sponsored by Binary Tree.
So welcome everybody, this is Tony Redmond. Welcome to Exchange Exposed version 4. We got lots of stuff to talk to you today about what we heard at Ignite, what's happening in the world of on-premises Exchange with Exchange 2016 on the scene, and indeed what's been happening in Office 365. We've also got a special guest on the show today. We've got Justin Harris, who's an MVP in Exchange and also a Microsoft Certified Master. And he works for Binary Tree. He's been working in the area of AD migrations and that kind of stuff. And he's going to talk to us about the kind of things that you need to look out for when you're preparing to migrate an Active Directory on-premises deployment over to the cloud, or at least make it ready for hybrid connections. We'll get to all of that later on. Anyway, this podcast, we hope to stay at a fairly strategic level. Of course, sometimes, given that we're technologists, we don't actually manage to do that. We do get down in the weeds, but we'll try and stay out of there as much as we can. So let's start off. Paul, Mr. Robichaux, my co-presenter. The current state of Exchange. What did we learn about Exchange 2016, which is due, I think, in October-ish? What did we learn at Ignite? What did Microsoft reveal, if they revealed anything?
Well, there are two ways to answer that question. One is the sort of the obvious explicit reveal. What did Microsoft come out and tell us and show us? And then there's sort of the implicit answer to the question. What did they not show us? What did they not tell us? So let's talk about the explicit version first. I think it's very interesting that Microsoft, one of the big things that they touted, and one of the most well-attended sessions at Ignite and one of the best-rated sessions at Ignite was a presentation on how the preferred architecture is changing for Exchange 2016. One of the things I took away from that session is that the preferred architecture is not actually changing all that much. And I think that's very interesting because it shows that Microsoft is comfortable with the recommendations that they're making and perhaps enforcing is too strong a word, strongly making for Exchange 2013. So
it's a very strong recommendation, isn't that what they're giving?
Yes. And they mean it, and we're not seeing the kind of shift that we saw in the move from 2003 to 2007 or 2007 to 2010 or even 2010 to the 2013 preferred architecture, where Microsoft said, well, we know there are lots of different ways to deploy these technologies, and we know that we've been recommending a particular way, but now we want to disrecommend that. Of course, the canonical example, although many of our listeners may not have been involved with Exchange this long ago, was when Microsoft said, oh, we told you about active-active clustering in Exchange 2000, but we don't really think you should use it anymore. I didn't see any sign of any of those kind of strategic shifts brought about by new features in 2016. And in fact, one of the things that was most interesting to me was to see the payoff when 2013 was introduced, that one of the changes that isolating the CAS role would allow was being able to more seamlessly match or more seamlessly mix different versions of Exchange. And sure enough, that's exactly what we're seeing in 2016. That isolating the mailbox and CAS roles so that they are limited to a very small number of very well-defined communication channels really gives us as administrators a lot more deployment flexibility when it comes time to upgrade.
But they're coming away from the separate roles totally, right? I mean, it's now multi-role is it.
Yep, multi-role is all we get, and the edge role. Let's not forget. I noticed it was very. It's very interesting to notice that Microsoft did explicitly say that there would be an edge role at RTM. I think they got the message loud and clear from perhaps some of their larger, better funded or more willing to spend money customers that the edge role was important to them. But I do wonder whether we're going to see any substantive changes in that role, given how few changes there were in the 2013 role when it shipped. I think it's very interesting that Microsoft came out and publicly said, yes, we will support Exchange when it is used in IaaS environments, infrastructure as a service, because that's something that has been...
But only Azure.
Only Azure for now. Now, of course, if you talk to the Amazon folks, they will tell you that they support Exchange on Amazon Web Services, which they do. Now, is it the same level of support. That's probably a better philosophical argument than it is one to have here.
Yeah, it strikes me a lot like the situation we had at the start of virtualization, where
Exactly.
VMware would do it, but Microsoft really wouldn't go near it until they had a hypervisor themselves. And it's actually interesting when you look at the guys who are running the Exchange program for Amazon Web Services. There's a couple of guys there who are old-time Exchange fellows. You know, I mean, they've been around the block with the product, and as you say, they will support it. But did you get the feeling that the preferred architecture is going to be really emphasized? It's going to be almost this is the only way you can deploy the product.
I don't know that I would go as far as to say that Microsoft will ever come out and publicly say it's the only way to deploy it. I think we're going to continue to see a focus on use of the word simplification.
Right.
And I think that's interesting because Exchange, of course, is anything but simple. But we've been seeing this sort of steady drumbeat both from people who are directly involved in Exchange marketing is the wrong word. I think of Ross Smith, for example. He doesn't strike me as being particularly marketing oriented, but
the
his role is
evangelists, right? Customer
evangelism, or what used to be called the customer experience team. I don't know that it's still called that, but folks who are in that kind of role, whose job it is to carry a message to customers and make sure that they understand it and that they're able to get on board with it. I think they're going to continue to push for simplifying environments wherever possible. So doing away with SandStorm, reducing the drive or reducing the benefit from using SANS as opposed to JBOD was a key step forward. Multi-role only is a key step forward. In other words, reducing the number of places where you have to make decisions about how to deploy things, of course, makes the environment simpler. Microsoft has done that very effectively in Office 365. There's one way to do it in their data centers.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So, Justin, you I know have been involved in a number of very large implementations. What did you think about? Do you think there's much value in having a preferred architecture, something that the product group says, this is the way to do it?
Absolutely. I think as architects in times past, it was just simply very easy for people to be told that we're migrating to the next version of Exchange, and then for them to go and Google all the different types of designs and setups and all the cool features of the product, and then try and just pile those on top of each other and just make a convoluted mess of the design. Yes, exactly. So the preferred architecture allows us as architects and trusted advisors to meet with the customer and say, Mr. Customer, I hear what you would like to do. I see your design. However, the preferred architecture for this type of service and workload is this. And so that really creates a center point or a foundation that you can kind of work off of and kind of remove the design from that based on whatever the business or technical requirements that they present.
Yeah, but do you not think then the customer is going to say to you, well, you're the very highly paid consultant. Here's what I want to do. I know those Microsoft guys want to do it this way. Can't you do it my way?
Well, that's always the difficulty in being a trusted advisor, is that you have to weigh both sides. And when they push, ultimately they're the ones that are going to do it and are funding the project. But they have to understand the ramifications and acknowledge, I hear what you're saying, I hear what Microsoft is saying, but this is what I'm doing for this reason.
For this reason, right. So, Paul, coming back to some of the stuff that we heard about, one of the things that struck me was that there's an awful lot of subtle changes in 2016 that flow directly from Microsoft's experience of running Office 365 at massive scale. Did you get the same impression?
I did. I think that's a really fair characterization. As Microsoft continues to ramp up the scale of Office 365, they continue to find areas where they can sort of squeeze inefficiency out of the product. They find new things that can be automated, new things that can be optimized both from a performance standpoint but also from a management standpoint. And some of those things naturally are going to flow into the on-premises product. I look, for example, at the improvements that have come in, or that are coming, I should say, in managed availability management to make it easier to see what managed availability is doing and to, if not control it, then at least be more aware of it. That's a huge improvement for on-premises customers because as valuable as managed availability is, it's still voodoo to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I think it's fair to say that I haven't seen anything in Exchange 2016 that immediately makes me want to start calling customers and saying, wow, you're not going to believe this. Here's why you are going to want to deploy Exchange 2016 at the earliest opportunity. There are a lot of small improvements that I think cumulatively make for good potential, but there don't seem to be any single killers as yet.
So is it really a service pack? I called it a service pack. I got a lot of feedback about that particular one. Boy, I got a lot of mail about that.
You did, and it's interesting that you asked that question because, of course, one of the things that's changing in the new serviceability model is that we're not going to have service packs as they have conventionally existed in the past, and we're even getting a fairly new servicing model in with the existence of the new long-term servicing branch. So I think that's a pretty significant change that, interestingly enough, is mostly non-technical. It doesn't have much to do with the features in the product. It has to do with how Microsoft supports and services it once it's been deployed.
Yeah, I think to me it seems almost natural. I mean, when you think about it, Exchange 4.0 was shipped in 1996, March 1996. So we're nearly 20 years down the path in terms of seeing the product evolve. And boy, a lot of water has flowed under the bridge since then. And I think it's probably natural that right now we're in a period of stability, fine tuning, and really the new big features that come along. Where are they? I mean, they can't. There's a limit in a non-premises environment to how much you can extract out of one server. I mean, is that fair?
Well, it is. You have to counterpose that against the growth in hardware capacity that we saw during that same time period. Right now, you can take a low-end commodity server from your favorite hardware vendor and easily put thousands of Exchange mailboxes on it if you have enough physical spots to put disks in. And that wasn't the case 15 years ago or even 5 years ago. I think that's made a big difference as well.
Yeah, but I'm talking about, scalability is coming back because we've got Moore's Law and we've got better hardware, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just thinking about if you're thinking as a software designer and you're looking at the bare fabric of Exchange, what it has today, and you're thinking, how am I going to improve this? It's kind of difficult to come up with the kind of big feature like, let's say, high availability was for Exchange 2010. And I'm just wondering, where is the next really big feature?
I don't know that there are any more big features that fit into the conventional paradigm that we all use to think about email. And the reason I say that is that even the things that I think are going to be most useful from a feature standpoint, for example, I love the idea of modern attachments, for example, the ability to send what looks like an attachment to the recipient, but which is really a link to a OneDrive document or a OneDrive for Business document. But from a technical standpoint, that's not really the same order of magnitude as the first support for Windows failover clustering, for example.
Right.
So I think it's fair to say that the improvements that we are going to see in the future are going to revolve much more around integration and probably around things that we haven't thought of being associated with email in the past. Right. I mean, if you look at the adoption of Slack, if you look at the number of other companies that are trying to copy Slack's success, I think you can make an argument that there's something in between ephemeral chat and permanent message-oriented email that maybe Exchange starts to absorb or to shift toward, or at least to support in the future. But I don't know that that's an engineering revolution as much as it is a cultural change about how we use email and what its role is.
So that's that's something that I was absolutely thinking. I was thinking about Slack, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Paul, because you look at Office 365 groups and what that brings into the equation. So if that came on premises and then you had all those other integration points that you could pull, like line of business apps, into groups. Then you have a very social environment, and exchange. The look of Exchange really starts to change with those type of features that are implemented.
It would be nice to get groups into the on-premises environment, but I just don't know if it's going to happen. But anyway, moving along, other things that happened, we were to promise much easier deployments of 2016, which kind of emphasizes that maybe it is more of a service pack than a full new release in some views. ESE is still there. They're not going to go through SQL. I think we can bury that forever and ever and ever. And we have a new client. We have Outlook 2016 coming along. Any thoughts about those three things?
Every time somebody talks about Exchange on SQL, I'm reminded of the experience that IBM had when they put notes on DB2. Right?
Yeah.
They went to all this effort, and Ed Brill, bless his heart, trumpeted that
yes.
they were doing this, and it turns out that adoption of it was vanishingly low. I don't think they ever got above a single-digit percentage adoption rate, because what customers said they wanted and what they actually were willing to spend money on deploying were two completely different things. So sure, let's say that Microsoft could snap their fingers tomorrow morning, and with no delay, no interruption to the release flow, they could magically make Exchange work on SQL. I don't think very many customers would deploy it, because there are a large number of customers out there who don't have SQL DBAs, who don't have an existing SQL infrastructure, and who wouldn't benefit from the effort and money it would take to change over. So I'm totally okay with that. I'm glad to see that horse has finally not only died, but been given a decent burial.
And with a stake through its heart. What about Outlook? Outlook 2016. Again, what type of innovation are we going to see here, or is it just going to be more of the same?
Well, it's hard to answer that question because we have so many different outlooks to shake a stick at. We have Outlook 2016. We have Universal Outlook for Windows 10, which I have not spent any time working with. We have the mobile outlooks, to some extent, which are going to be maybe feature merge is not quite the right, which are going to take on a larger resemblance to universal apps as time goes on. So I don't think 2016, from my test with it, it has been like 2013, only better. It has a few nice features that I like. It is much better integrated with Office 365 and its services, for example, so that if I edit a document using Office 2016 on the Mac and save it into a OneDrive folder, then when I go to my PC, that file appears in the recently used file list when I want to attach it.
Right.
From within Outlook. That's a nifty integration feature that plays into. Go ahead, Tony.
Well, no, I was just agreeing with you, Paul. I think it is a better cloud client. It probably speaks to the changes that have happened in the Office 365 space since Outlook 2013 and the other Office 2013 apps appeared. But apart from the integration of groups, Office 365 groups into Outlook, I don't see anything tremendous there that's going to make me run out and say from the top of the hills that you need to go and upgrade to this version. Apart from the fact that clearly there's going to be an impetus to keep people on or to get people to use the most recent client available. But I mean,
well, that's one of the big advantages of buying into the Office 365 model. At least if you're buying, a Plan 3 or Plan 4, is that you have the license rights to upgrade to the latest version always. And I think that is going to play out very favorably for Microsoft, because I know they have many customers who originally bought 365 licenses primarily to get those Office usage rights. So I think we're probably going to see a little bit difference in the rate of adoption for Office 2016 when it ships, because of those 365 clients who can upgrade without having to spend any extra money. And of course, it doesn't ease any of the headaches and logistics that go behind doing a rollout of a new version of Office in the enterprise. That's still going to be a challenge.
Right, and maybe just to complete our run through Exchange, what about CU9 due very imminently? What do you think? What do you expect?
So Microsoft has gotten pretty good about focusing their attention on fixing the most critical problems first in CUs. And so I think as time goes by, what we see is the granularity of those fixes gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Right,
Yeah.
the big bugs tend to get fixed in CU1, and then the next biggest ones in CU2, and so on. We're getting to the point now where many of the things that are fixed in CU6, CU7, CU8 were issues that most customers were not likely to run into. They were very specific fixes that were targeted at specific issues, and I think that's okay. I think that speaks well of the maturity of the product, that we're not seeing a lot of huge fixes and huge functionality changes. And of course, at this point in the game, now that Microsoft has already announced 2016 and has started talking about it publicly, I wouldn't expect to see a great deal of effort put into backporting features or adding new features into 2013.
Yeah. The only interesting thing about it, I think, this particular release, which has been pretty solid in terms of the beta builds and stuff like that, I think it's worthwhile saying that it does include the MS15-64 security fixes. And those fixes were released on June the 9th for SP1 and
Right.
CU8. Now, some people actually were surprised by that, because they're saying, well, CU7 is still a supported release. Why didn't Microsoft release a patch for CU7? And of course, the reason is that CU9 is imminent, and once CU9 appears, you're going to have the supported releases will be SP1, which they have to support, because that's what the commitment was, and the last two releases, which at that stage will be CU9 and CU8. So that's the reason why there's no security patch available for CU7. Right, so we change gears a little bit and talk about Office 365 a bit.
Yes, let's.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about it. Because one of the interesting things too that's going to happen very, very soon is that on I think it's August the 1st. Is it August the 1st? Microsoft's going to put up client access license prices by 13%
Yes.
for on-premises products, including Exchange. And of course, anytime they increase the price, it brings all sorts of dark thoughts into people's minds, that they're trying to convince people that now is the time to move off on-premises into the cloud. And of course, we are seeing quite a rapid movement at this point. Whatever count you want to put on it, there's likely to be upwards now of 100 million mailboxes in Office 365, and this 13% rise is probably going to encourage some other folks to go across. But I think actually, when you think about it, the 13% is probably justified by a couple of things. And I'm not trying to make apologies for Microsoft, but the fact is that they are investing a whole heck of a lot of money developing clients which work on iOS and Android and work for on-premises and cloud, so that clearly people are getting more value there. And the other thing too is that if the installed base on-premises declines, they've still got a substantial engineering team to pay for, and you'd like to get those security fixes and stuff like that. Now, none of that logic is going to go across at all well with people, but that's just the way it is. Anyway, enough of that kind of thing. Biggest thing about Office 365 at Ignite was, anybody? Biggest thing? No, you guys are all very quiet. Well, I'll throw out, I think the two big things that Microsoft really tried to make a fuss of at Ignite were, number one, groups, which are obviously got a lot of focus. They had an awful lot of sessions as well. In fact, some people have commented since that if you compare the number of sessions that groups had to the number of sessions that Yammer had, it seemed that Microsoft was almost sending an implicit message to the whole community that this is where their development efforts are going to be. However, I think it simply reflected that there was a whole pile of new things to talk about in Office 365 groups, and they just needed to. It was actually the first major conference that they had to talk about it. So that's why I thought that they focused so much time. That be saying, it's obvious that these groups are becoming a growing source of authority across Office 365. In fact, I've described it as saying that the group's developers are treating all the apps in Office 365 as a kind of a spare parts bin that they can grab stuff from. So they've taken a calendar from Exchange, they've taken a shared mailbox from Exchange, they've taken a document library from SharePoint, they've taken a shared OneNote notebook, and there's other stuff on the way. I mean, they showed a CRM, an integration with Dynamics CRM, and they mentioned Yammer as well. So it seems like these groups are becoming a one-stop shop for getting access to all of these different type of resources. And in fact, to me, it's kind of like a very good example of where you get an integrated fabric like Office 365 that's managed centrally. It's got a big engineering group behind it, and you can go and you can build a hell of a lot more complex software on top of it when you have control of those moving parts, all of those moving parts. By comparison, if you were to try and figure out, how would I package this up, and how would I develop it, and how would I deliver it to on-premises customers, given the almost glacial speed that some IT departments move at, would it be ever possible to get such an integrated technology deployed on premises? Which just is the reason why I don't think we're ever going to see groups on premises. I just don't see it happening. So that was the first thing I saw. And the second thing that I thought that there was a lot of emphasis was Delve. Or maybe not just Delve, maybe also the Office Graph. Because, of course, Delve is just the first and most major example of how to surface the signals that are accumulated in the Office Graph database, which runs for every Office 365 tenant unless you explicitly turn it off. And we started off in the Ignite keynote when Julia White was on stage, and she put up this slide showing graph analytics, which revealed things like your work-life balance, revealed things like how effective you were in dealing with email and stuff like that. And immediately the lights went on, and not in the room, but in the brains of a lot of people looking at it, saying, "Oh my gosh, this sounds like time and motion studies all over again." People with stopwatches looking at users, thinking how effective they are at dealing with work. But the fact is that this graph database is accumulating all of these signals gathered from across all of Office 365, putting it in this huge database, which is then available for analysis. It's available for people to probe with a Graph API, GQL, the Graph Query Language, and is available to do a whole pile of analysis and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes over the next few years. In fact, I saw one discussion today on the Yammer network for Office 365, which I thought was really, really, really interesting, and it was all about the fact that Delve, which only exposes information to users if they are entitled to see that information, is all of a sudden exposing a whole pile of information to people that the owners of that information thought was private. And it speaks to the fact that, there's an awful lot of very bad permissions schemes in use out there in different organizations. And if people don't permission their sites right, and they don't maintain those permissions correctly, they are in danger of having intelligent software like Delve come along and say, "Oh, well, here's this document, here's this user. User has access to document. I'll show them the document." And all of a sudden, you've got your HR plan for restructuring for next year in the hands of everybody. An interesting thing off that as well was that it made the point that the administrators of site collections, which is a SharePoint concept, all automatically have access to every document in the site collection. And there's a good reason for this, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to manage the site collection. But of course, this means that if I log into Office 365 and use an administrator account, which is highly permissioned, highly privileged, and I then use Delve, guess what? I can see every document in every document library on the site, and Delve is quite happy to deliver that to me. So the old on-premises thing of clearly separating administration accounts away from your work accounts just comes back into focus again. But it just seems that people haven't been using them. So those are the two big things I saw in Delve, or at Ignite. Office 365 groups, Delve, and the Office Graph. What do you guys see, Paul?
I don't know that I saw any one big thing at Ignite. I saw a lot of little things that I think, when you add them all together, paint a pretty convincing picture of where Microsoft is going. First is, as you mentioned, the licensing fee change. They're clearly trying to give people more financial incentives to move to the cloud, apart from the incentive of giving partners deployment funding to help reduce the initial deployment cost. Now they're going to change the licensing cost in such a way that it may make even more economic sense for you to move to the cloud. But whereas at MEC and SharePoint Conference and Lake Conference last year, there was at least sort of a recognition from Microsoft that, yeah, we know this is, we know people want these features on-prem. They don't seem apologetic anymore. It seems like they're saying, well, these features are coming to the cloud. We're not going to put them on-prem. If you want them, come to the cloud. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing to make it more explicit and more open, so that there is not any doubt in customers' minds about where Microsoft's focus is. So at the same time, they are continuing to say, yes, we're going to have on-prem products. They're also saying products are going to lag feature-wise in some important ways. And if you don't like that, that's too bad. That's just the way it is. So I think that's an important recognition.
Right, and it all comes back to that being able to control everything inside Office 365. Once you can control everything, you can be sure that you're going to have the same software versions everywhere. It's going to be deployed and installed and managed the same way everywhere. You're going to be sure that if you write some code to integrate two products together, like Skype and for Business and Exchange, or SharePoint and Exchange, it's going to happen in the right way at the right time everywhere. So that gives them that confidence. And I think it's perfectly okay for them to come out and say, you know what, these are the features that are going to be in the cloud, like the Office Graph, like Delve, and you're not going to get them on premises. I'm sorry, just that's the way it is. So you have to basically make that trade-off decision as which is the right platform for you. End of story.
Right. Now, one thing that they're doing that helps take the sting out a little bit is they also are being very aggressive about building APIs to get that data. So you mentioned the Graph API. There's also a very rich set of APIs for manipulating other Office 365 data. So creating or reading documents in a OneDrive library, working with items that are in an Exchange Online mailbox. So at the same time, Microsoft is saying, well, you need to move your data to the cloud because we're going to give you better services at a lower cost. They also are opening up 365 as a development platform in a way that they haven't before with their on-premises products. And I think that's a really significant development that doesn't seem to have borne a lot of fruit yet because it's still new. But I think if we have this same conversation again in a year, or 2 years even, we're going to see some pretty significant applications that have been built to leverage the data that people are putting into 365.
Right, and it's also interesting that they're making these APIs. They're all REST-based, right? And they're designed to expose the APIs to as many different development methodologies and methods as developers want to use. They're not tying them into the Microsoft way of doing things. Whatever platform you want to use Python, you want to use PHP, you want to use anything, you can go and use these REST-based APIs to get a data, which means, of course, that some of the older APIs like Exchange Web Services, well, I guess it's going to be continuing as a basis for the Outlook for Mac client, for the moment. It also has its uses on premises, but I'd say the time is running out. The sands are running out for EWS.
Right.
Right. So, Justin, what did you pick up at Ignite? What did you think was the most about Office 365?
Well, I had a personal vested interest in Office 365 groups, so I was interested to really see how Microsoft chose to parade out that technology with Ignite, and just to kind of piggyback on some of the things that you mentioned about groups. I thought the loose coupling story was very interesting, and that was essentially where they take services like Exchange Online and SharePoint Online, and that the interaction between them, how they notify each other of the changes to a group, like if it's created or deleted, using a process called forward sync, was interesting. So just seeing the way they constructed that synchronization mechanism and how the Azure AD group object, everything flows against that. That was the single source. So I found that specifically interesting. And then also the way how each service could live independently of each other. So new workloads could just kind of be popped in and appear. So you mentioned like Dynamic CRM, Delve, and Yammer later on. And then even to extend that story, the APIs that they've opened up to help developers and help drive adoption by really encouraging companies to develop against groups for their own line of business applications and workflows to really wrap that in to the internal workflow and story. I think that if that actually happens, I think that will rapidly help the adoption of 365.
Good points. But before we get too enamored with Office 365 groups, let's also reflect that they're still not a fully baked entity. I mean, you still need Outlook 2016 not released yet for if you want to use them from Outlook, and there are still some fundamental flaws in the functionality, such as the total inability to recover data if you delete a group by accident. There's no soft deletion; it's a hard deletion. Data goes away immediately. It's gone. End of story. Those are two things that I think that really need to be in place before we're going to see substantial uptick on the adoption of Office 365 groups, even though they're showing an enormous amount of potential right now.
Right. And
I think the other thing that comes to mind, of course, you're just talking about costs and licenses and stuff like that. Perry Clark, who's the VP of Exchange Development at Microsoft, he made an interesting observation during one of the sessions he did about running Exchange Online. He was talking about, their cost per mailbox with everything they put into it is about $4 a month. I think that's the figure he came up with. And the kind of challenge he was putting out there was, well, can you guys in the on-premises world deliver mailboxes which are 50 gig with archives which are 100 gig, and by the way, with the new expandable model, can go as high as you want, with all of this extra functionality like Clutter and Delve and all the rest that you can only get in Office 365 with Office 365 groups and stuff. He said, can you get that for $4 a month per mailbox on premises? And I thought there were a lot of people in that room who suddenly started to become very concerned and saying, ooh, that's a very low number. That is really a low number, isn't it?
Well, I think the counter argument to that is
nobody wants to take me on that. You think you can run on-premises mailboxes for $4 a month?
I certainly can't deliver everything that Office 365 delivers for that amount of money, and it would be questionable whether, except at a very large scale, a very constrained environment, if I could deliver mailboxes for that much money. I mean, that is not a lot of money for the Exchange Online feature set that you're getting.
And I would add that, I think if you look at it objectively, it's a little bit of a straw man argument, because who's to say that final price is what the business requirements are geared toward. Every customer's business requirements different, and cost is absolutely a factor, but that's not always the main goal is the cost. So there are some other arguments that can be brought up around that, but it definitely, when you get down to that actual cost, it is jaw-dropping around that, based on all the services that is actually provided to the end user for that cost.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. I think business requirements such as privacy, security, flexibility, all those type of things have to come into play. But the point is that just as when Google introduced Google Apps for $50 a user per year and caused everybody's eyes to go, oh my gosh, that's really, really, really low. These type of figures and the amount of functionality, which, by the way, with Exchange Online is so much more than what Google was providing, or Office 365 is so much more than what Google was providing. My gosh, it's just awesome, really, actually. What else happened recently in Office 365? Well, a couple of quick things we go through very quickly. First release. There's now the ability. First release, of course, is just the ability to say that you're going to take new functionality early. Some of this new functionality that we've just talking about. Now you've got the ability to say that only certain members of my tenant will take the new functionality early, which seems like a good idea. But mind you, I ran into a little problem with that with Clutter. And this is what happened. Clutter has recently started to give you the ability to get summary messages, receive summary messages every day about what happened in your mailbox in terms of what messages it cleaned up for you and all the rest of it, which is all very nice. Now, I've been on first release for ages. And it was kind of worrying to me that everybody that I spoke to was receiving these messages and I wasn't. Clearly I wasn't one of the favored ones. So I did a little bit of research and found out that because I had switched over to what they call the staged rollout, which it's an organizational setting. If you run the get organization config commandlet, you'll find out that there's a release track property for your tenant. And it can be either standard release, first release, or staged rollout. So I was on staged rollout. I was one of the members of the tenant that was nominated to get the features early. But older features like Clutter, because it's been around for a while, don't actually respect the staged rollout setting. So because I had switched off first release, which is what Clutter was looking for, when it examined a tenant's settings, it saw staged release and said, oh, this guy wants standard stuff. It's not on first release. So I never saw them. Once I switched back to first release for the entire tenant, I got the reports. That's kind of interesting. So that's in there now. We've got a new version of Active Sync. Paul, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, actually, first of all, I'm glad you explained the issue with Clutter summary reports, because I haven't been getting them on my tenant either, and I thought that Clutter just hated me. But now I know
they do.
Otherwise.
It does. It does. Absolutely hate
That's
you.
probably also true. I know Kumar and Jim are tired of hearing me ask them questions about it, so maybe that's transferred into the code. So one of the things that doesn't have anything to do with Ignite, but which is kind of an interesting development, is the announcement of a new release of the Exchange ActiveSync protocol, version 16, that presumably is going to be included in it'll be included in Office 365. It may eventually make it to on-prem, although it doesn't seem to have been announced as such yet.
2016, I heard. I heard it's in 2016.
I heard that too. But anyway, I haven't seen evidence of that yet. I think it's very interesting that Microsoft is doing this because, as you know, the new Outlook clients that they acquired when they got Accompli use Exchange ActiveSync sort of behind the scenes, but I wouldn't consider them to be pure EAS clients. And when you look at the list of things that are included in EAS 16, the biggest, most interesting item is that the workflow for registering and syncing calendar items has completely been revised. Now, of course, the very first thing I thought when I saw that was, well, let's see, does Microsoft have any large partners who put EAS software on devices who have a long track record of completely screwing up their calendar implementation? Not to name any names, Apple. But then at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference this same week, they announced that support for EAS 16 would be included in the next release of iOS. So it's very interesting to me to see that apparently, at some level, Microsoft and or Apple decided it's going to be easier to release a brand new protocol implementation than it is to go back and try to make these existing devices behave properly. That was kind of the way that I took that announcement.
Right. So we think that there's goodness in EAS 16 and looking forward to it. But mind you, every client, you mentioned the Apple client, so that's iOS 9. The other clients, like, for example, Mobile Outlook and Windows Phone, that has to be updated. And, of course, any other client that's there that uses, like all the Android clients, they also have to be updated as well.
Well, of course, they don't have to. That's one of the beauties of EAS because it does version negotiation. If you want to take advantage of the new calendar processing workflow, then your client will have to be updated. But I would argue that particularly the Windows Phone implementation and then maybe secondarily the Android implementations that are out there, they don't seem to have had the bad track record of calendar behavior that Apple has had. So maybe those vendors don't need to worry as much about adding EAS 16 support just yet.
Oh, that's true. Okay, so I think we've probably done Office 365 to death. Let's switch on to Justin. Let's put the spotlight on him. And clearly, he's taken up a new role just recently at Binary Tree, and maybe he wants to tell us a little bit about what he's been working on.
Sure. Thank you for having me on, guys. So I actually just started.
Always good to have a victim.
I know. I got to prepare myself. So I did start a new role at Binary Tree in January, and changing jobs is always an exciting thing. But I'm enjoying my job and my role a lot. But when you asked me to come on the podcast, I wanted to make sure that whatever I talked about would be interesting to all my Exchange and Office 365 brethren out there, and that it would actually align with what, as Binary Tree, we're doing day to day. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is that as I discuss with customers on a daily basis about AD and Exchange migrations, and we get into looking at their design plans and project plans, and this can range from simple, small customers to the large 200,000 seat multinational customers, I found something interesting. I'm seeing an alarming trend that is really coming from these conversations. And as a trusted advisor, or trying to be a trusted advisor with them, I'm trying to help them create the best design and migration plan that they can for their project. But in the context of migrating to Office 365, that conversation has taken an interesting turn when you bring up Active Directory. And it's really I would say the uh-oh moment. Because a lot of times, the customer's underlying Active Directory infrastructure is really, really poor in the way it was implemented. And in most cases, the customer doesn't even really know what's churning through their directory infrastructure as a whole. And it's really only when we start digging in and getting our hands dirty in the environment that we see that 5, 10 plus years of mismanagement or even lack of management that has survived. So the technical challenge that I face here when I'm engaging with clients like this is not only to gather their business requirements, but also to help them understand the importance of a discovery process around their current directory infrastructure. So
just let me stop you there for a moment just to ask you, how do you said that a lot of these AD infrastructures are poor. How do you actually discover that? I mean, is it a matter of manually going and looking at connecting to a domain controller and then looking at what's happening, or do you have some tools that you run What's in your
Right.
toolbox, in other words?
So as I'm talking with customers and they're getting introduced for 365, they're getting ready to set up hybrid, they're all excited about their project. Once we start talking about directory synchronization, then all of a sudden the project that they thought they had becomes a little bit more complex, especially when you drill past all the surface fluff. So, I'll try to engage the customer and draw them out by asking questions to really get that conversation going, asking them, why they're migrating, what's their migration scenario, how many user objects, how many remote workers are involved in this migration? Are there going to be trusts in place? What's the budget? And the ugly little problem that comes up almost every time, and that's really spawned the subject that I wanted to talk to you today about, is that over the years, there's been a ton of different types of AD structures that have been favored or fell out of favor. So when we talk to these companies, there's a million different scenarios and designs that we're confronted with. There could be the large enterprise that has forests for every business unit, and I'm sure that you've seen that, where trusts are pointing every which way and there's hundreds of them. Or it could be the traditional account resource forest model. But whenever you have that type of setup, you're really introducing a level of risk and complexity into your environment. And that's something that I try to interject from the very beginning to really get the customer to understand that just because you're going to Office 365 and you have your design and you understand that process, that doesn't mean that the directory infrastructure doesn't need to be looked at or be cared for prior to that migration.
So what are you really looking for? Are you looking for them to simplify before they do before they start to synchronize with Office 365?
So I really bang the drum in that instance to distill down to as few domains as possible to flatten the directory structure, because that'll really put them in the best scenario for their preparations in migrating to Office 365. And the rationale that I use for this is that the directory synchronization component becomes a lot less complex when you're dealing with a flat domain structure. Because in times past, you would have to utilize maybe FIM, and that's a really complex product. Try and find a master level FIM expert. So that adds layers of complexity. You can use Azure AD Sync, but that could sometimes lead to multiple installs and a lot of moving parts. So that really plays in to our wheelhouse with the release of the new Active Directory Migrator product.
Okay.
Because as the trusted advisor in this situation, when I'm helping the customer review their designs and project plans, I'll ask to see their as-built AD diagram. And most of the times, it's just quiet on the other side of the table. But I'll press and ask questions about their directory infrastructure, like I had mentioned, and what it looks like and what it contains. And we would call that inside binary tree as rationalizing the environment. So
okay.
the customer that has
what's the process? I mean, do you I'm just trying to visualize it for myself, because I mean, clearly there's a hell of a lot of old Active Directory deployments around us. So let's say you've got, as you said, one of the classic ones where you've got an account domain and you've got all these resource domains. So well, you take this tool, does it suck in all the information about the various domains and then give you the opportunity to restructure? Is that the way it works?
Yes. So the customer that has the forest and domains everywhere, and maybe their OU structure spiraling out of control, we introduce the Smart Active Directory Migrator platform to them, and using that platform, we can suck in all the security principles in the source and even target environments into a database. And using the platform, we can help them reshape their directory infrastructure even if they don't have trusts in place, to make sure that it's cloud ready, or to flatten what they actually have. So
Okay.
as part of that
No,
process.
go ahead. Go ahead. I'm just thinking out loud, which I realize is a terribly bad habit when you're recording something.
So using that platform, now we've allowed the customer to utilize a directory synchronization project that's going to transform all their security principles during this consolidation process, and they can tackle the 365 synchronization requirements as well, like UPNs and matching. So utilizing our platform, we can address all those problems that the old type of Active Directory structures introduced. So we can address the nested OU structure,